Okay, everybody, welcome to our live stream with Dr. Donald Dutton, our established and wonderful and very much appreciated scholar of domestic abuse, and he is a very reputable advisor of the Canadian Association for Equality, of which both Khalil and I are executive members. So we're going to allow Don to speak on his own behalf about some of his research, and we're going to have him summarize some of that research. But we're also going to, I'm just going to introduce Khalil. He's the director here at Edmonton Cafe, and he's been doing some great work building up essentially, we're not a business, but a business model. And he has pretty much done all the organization up, and all the progress we've made so far is pretty much due to his contributions. And so I just started Cafe Edmonton a couple weeks ago. I've been helping him. He's been a one-man show so far, so I'm happy to hear, happy to help. And so we're just going to go right into our conversation here with Dr. Donald Dutton. I'm going to let him talk about some of the baseline summaries. We want to talk more about, because we have that, I'm going to put a link in the low bar to his wonderful presentation that was set up by Senator Ann Cools to the Canadian Senate on domestic abuse, and he debunks most of the, the ideological nonsense that we see. But like I reached out to Don because I had a grotesque article lately that I was reading in the Edmonton media, and this is it was pretty much regurgitating all the stereotypes that we've ever seen about domestic abuse. And as many of us know, working class people, that many of these stereotypes are simply not true. Well, in isolated incidents they may be, but not as a generality. And so, so this is really about getting back to the debunking myths, and we're also going to be talking about getting past all the knee-jerk reactions and getting into the implementation. So, I'd like to introduce Dr. Donald Dutton.
Thank you.
And we're going to have him summarize a few points, but do you want to talk about, just kind of summarize a little bit about the content that you had that you presented to the Senate? And it was a great explication. Like, you've really worked it through point by point and pretty much debunked all the nonsense.
Right. Well, I mean, what I was trying to do there was to simply show what the data show, the victimization data show about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, whatever you want to call it. And just to show how that really is at odds with stereotypes that we have. And so early on in that presentation, I pointed out some of the stereotypes, including a Google image of a guy with a belt and this woman cowering in the background, and went into Life with Billy. That's the stereotype, that all domestic abuse is a bullying male, patriarchal male who unilaterally beats up on a woman who's nonviolent. That's the stereotype. The data, of course, say something very, very different. First of all, what the data say, and when I say the data, I mean when you actually call people up using random digit dialing surveys and you get the most information back about incidents of domestic violence, and you get people to report on these surveys without giving their names, so there's no reason for them to really hide anything. What you find is that about 85 or 90 to 94% of people say there wasn't any domestic violence in the past year. It just wasn't there. And the remainder say there was some, but it was mainly pushing or shoving. And when you get into the stuff that might actually injure someone, punching them or kicking them or hitting them or using a weapon on them, you're getting into the 2 to 3% range for the general population. People don't seem to know that. And the Canadian General Social Survey that was done in 2004 did something like this. It wasn't exactly, the wording was a little different, but nevertheless, having said that, they got this sort of 4% rate of men reporting victimization by domestic violence and 3% rate for women reporting victimization by domestic violence. Then, of course, you have to ask yourself, of that report, how much is a serious kind of domestic violence that might cause injury? It's not just pushing and shoving. That would be 2% of men and 1.2% of women reporting being victims of the kind of domestic violence that could hurt them. That gets closer to the stereotype. So, those numbers are something that we need to keep in our minds when we're developing policy. We also need to know.
I have one question.
Yep.
Like, you brought up the crime filter earlier. Like, what is the problem with the crime filter, and like what are some of your methodologies that sort of you feel like it's more sensitive? So like, yeah, so some of our ideological advocacy research uses this crime filter, and that's what we see in the media, and that's what's portrayed on the billboards and whatnot, the results from that. So what would be the difference?
Well, the problem with the crime filter in surveys is that many people don't think of domestic violence as being a crime. This is especially true for men.
So what is the crime? What is the crime filter? Can you explain what that is?
The crime filter says, were you a victim of crime in the past year? Which of the following things were done to you that were crimes? So you have to define it as a crime, first of all. If you don't think that your wife hitting you with a frying pan was a crime, because if you picked up the phone and called the police, they laughed at you, you wouldn't report that.
That's right.
So you get very low report rates of crime filter. And in fact, Murray Strauss showed that, report rates go up by a factor of 16 when you remove the crime filter and just ask people to name specific acts that happened to them without having to label it as a crime or not.
Okay, and then that kind of dovetails into the psychological components, because when you start removing the crime filter, there's some questions about you have to come up with some theories about why the results are so different. Like, why are we seeing it this way now? So we have kind of a question, or we want a summary on what is assortative dating, and also what is the psychological component?
I think there's a slightly different issue there. I think the reason why the quote results, as you're calling them, look so different is because the press has tended to cite police statistics as their sole source for incidents of domestic violence, overlooking the fact that the police don't define domestic violence against men as actionable in most cases. Why? Because the system's not set up to deal with female perpetrators or male victims, and the police don't think that way. They've been pretty much brainwashed with the stereotype that domestic violence is all male perpetrated. So they basically say to the guy, listen, you need to take care of this yourself. I mean, I did one case in Vancouver where a guy called the police with a knife in his stomach and they arrested him.
Wow.
Okay. So, I mean, I didn't believe that first, but I checked on it. I wrote it up for the National Post. And yes, that's exactly what happened. They arrested him because they basically believe he must have done something to cause this disturbance. And the brainwashing is that complete. So, I mean, when you see people say 95% of domestic violence victims are female, they're coming from police data that have selectively chosen to act on female complaints and not to act on male complaints.
I see.
Yeah.
But I still want to address this. I think that it was a really interesting point where you said about assortative dating. I thought that was really interesting, because a lot of the data that you're coming up with when you remove the crime filter shows that there's gender parity. So most of the domestic abuse is actually bilateral, like it's common couple, it's going back and forth. So yeah, I guess maybe I'm jumping the gun, but I was very curious about that assortative dating.
Okay, well, gender parity simply means that there's roughly equal perpetration incidents. Actually, that's not true because females now clearly perpetrate more domestic violence than males do. The data are really pretty clear on that. And, we can look at, you can look at slide 65 of the presentation I gave in Ottawa. That shows 5 really broad sample surveys, large samples, all of which were done in the US, and I'll comment on this in a minute. And the reason why this is important is because in the US, they're actually allowed to ask people, were you a victim of domestic violence? Were you also a perpetrator of domestic violence? Canada has never asked that question. Stats Canada says, oh, we're only interested in victimization. So they wind up getting a really distorted view of domestic violence, because it turns out when you ask the second question, you find out that 75% of women who reported being victims were also perpetrators of domestic violence. Okay, so with these 5 surveys, they show the following statistics, that by far and away the most common form of domestic violence is two-way mutual domestic violence matched for level of severity. Survey after survey after survey shows that to be true. That goes to our issue of assortative mating. The second common form of domestic violence is female perpetrated violence against a non-violent male. That's a statistic that conventional feminist theories have a hard time dealing with, because women's
Definitely an ideological bearing.
Yeah, it's supposed to be all self-defense, but then why are these women more likely to beat up on a guy who's non-violent? And then the third most common form is wife battering, and that's 15% of all reported domestic violence. That's a reported domestic violence. So 50% is bilateral, 35% is female unilateral, 15% is male unilateral.
Okay.
And of that 15% male unilateral, 10% of that is going to be pushing and shoving. 5% is going to be the stereotype.
Okay.
That's 5% of all domestic violence, not of all people in a survey, but of all domestic violence reported. Actually, it fits the stereotype.
Yeah. Okay, so that's like a huge minority then, and that would mean that the services that we have really don't match up to the need.
No, they're
like
geared for that 5%. They're geared for that 5%. You know, I mean, clearly you want to do something else. What you want to do, first of all, you know, is if you're going to have state intervention, they should be intervening at a couples level, offering people communication training and, you know, how to resolve conflict in ways that they don't get all emotional and become violent. That would eat into the larger statistic of domestic violence much more quickly than the current system does, which is focused on these 5%ers.
Yeah, and we had a question about the psychological motivation versus, like, you know, this old cliche that it's a patriarchal, like this old Duluth model. So yeah, people are just frustrated and they don't have the skills and they're taking it out physically, I guess, or emotionally.
Let me elaborate on that a little bit. I mean, first of all, you know, the patriarchal model suggests that there's a broad social factor. Everybody should act this way. But in fact, if you go back and look at the data, 90%, 95% of people don't report domestic violence, male or female. So if the social factor is so strong, why are 95% of people not doing it?
Exactly.
Well, obviously, because the social factor is not nearly as strong as patriarchy theorists would like to have us believe. When you only get 5% of people doing something that others who are raised in exactly the same social circumstances as they were are not doing, it suggests a psychological set of causes.
So then why do people that have these tendencies to strike out this way, why do they sort of date? Like, why are they drawn to each other? Like, is it because they feel comfortable with people that solve problems the same way that they do?
Well, there's a couple of things. Let me first of all just sort of say what the data is for assortative mating. Some of it comes from a longitudinal study that was done in Montreal by Lisa Serban, where they assessed aggressiveness in school kids that were in grade 1 and grade 5, and they took the top 10% of the ones whose teachers' ratings said they were the most aggressive kids in school, male and female. And then they followed them over a long, long period of time until they became young adults. And what they found is when they became young adults, the ones who were most likely to have been rated aggressive in grade 1 and grade 5 were more likely to be together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So in other words, they'd selected other partners who were like them. Now, they maybe didn't select them necessarily for aggression, but they selected them for traits or characteristics that are associated with aggression. Like maybe they're a little bit outside the norm, or they're, you know, broke the rules a little bit more. Who knows? Because the best study hasn't been done on it yet. But we do know, for whatever set of reasons, these people do tend to select each other, and that's one of the reasons why so much domestic violence is bilateral.
That's really interesting. And it would be nice if we could talk about that, like, and actually acknowledge that it is a phenomenon that we're seeing, and that's what we need to, because it is the most common kind of domestic abuse. We need to,
right.
That would be a starting point to actually have something to do about it, like implementing the services that are appropriate for the issue, right?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I read most of the paper that you sent me. You did a long paper in it. I noticed it started off, you had to spend a lot of your time, instead of like talking about what we can do, you have to spend a lot of time just defending yourselves from ad hominems and completely, you know, like baseless accusations. So I guess that's part of the political component of, you know, speaking up against like something that's so institutionalized. So yeah, I wanted to move past that because I'm certainly getting tired of it, and I'm already convinced. I've looked at the data, and I'm, you know, I prefer, and I, you know, like, and anecdotally too. I mean, Karen Strawn speaks on this issue so much at her channel, but she has brought up anecdotally, like, there's things that, well, the stories always help people get more convinced than data. Sometimes you need to tell a story, right? So she'll talk about lesbians that approach like the Now conference or whatever, and they're talking about the domestic abuse in their community, and they can't get services, they can't even get acknowledgement. And so there'll be like this stony silence across the entire convention.
Yeah.
Until the lesbians like, oh, but of course it's gendered. Like, we think it's gendered. And so she pretty much has to be disingenuous to get any kind of like acknowledgement, because she's undermined her whole point. She's not going to get services or any kind of support from, these ideological communities, right? So.
Right. No, I know it too well. I got really sick of it.
I'm sick of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you talk to people who give you the impression that they've stopped listening, that they've completely clicked off. You present all the data to them, you make a great argument, and it's just like they're brain dead.
You can see the wheels stop turning in their head. It's frustrating, because this is hurting real people, and it's important. So I feel really strongly about this issue myself.
Yeah.
So like I said, we contacted you because we wanted to get the right scholar, the right man to get our questions answered. So thanks for doing this. And I went on the PASC website, the Partner of Eastern College, which I also heard about from Karen's channel.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some great training videos on there. So maybe you can comment on how to use the PASC website. Is it for everyday people, or is it only for social workers, or like? And I was wondering, Khalil and I are starting a virtual center.
Okay, that's a great idea.
Yeah, we're starting a virtual center, and it's going to service Canadian. It's going to be Edmonton based. We want to have a real center eventually. Cafe has 3 centers already. Service centers, they're at a physical location.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of strange
echo.
Yeah, I'm getting an echo basically.
Can you guys just mute this yourself for a second?
Okay.
There should be a mute. If you scroll, like kind of hover over the top there.
That's better.
Okay, so it was echoing through Khalil. Okay, so
much better.
Yeah. Okay, so Khalil and I are starting a virtual center, and we just implemented that. We have approval from Justin, and he's really excited about the idea. We don't have a physical space, but we do have a spreadsheet with all kinds of resources, and we would love some assistance or guidance from you, John. But we're wondering how
you want, and you're free to it. I mean, the PowerPoint presentation I sent you, which is the one I presented in Ottawa, is a really great start for everyone because it takes them through stereotypes, tells them how it's measured, looks at a lot of the data. You say you already got the YouTube of me. That's good, because that's sort of a general wrap on that particular PowerPoint. But if there's anything else that you need elaborated on, or you want a little
well, we're wondering how to get, like, what can we do? Like, well, maybe Khalil, this is a good time for your questions.
1 second.
Khalil, we can't hear you. Turn your mic on.
Now? Hello?
Yeah, I can see. Yeah.
Okay, well, I had a few questions, but they're more, okay, well, if there's, for example, the first question I have is if there's an abused man or abused father in a relationship and he's on the receiving end, what does he do now? Especially if there's children involved. Like, how does he, because you're aware of it, obviously. You talked about the National Post article where the man was stabbed and he was arrested.
Yeah.
So where does a man in that situation
all he can is try and report it to the police.
Sure.
Try and insist that there be a police report made on it. He may not get anywhere with that. Go to a private therapist and talk about it.
Yep.
In other words, he needs to create a paper trail, because down the road it may come back to bite him, that if there's a divorce or custody or whatever goes on, that is, his wife may be claiming that he's the one that's abusive and he's not, blah, blah, blah. So he's simply got to get some kind of paper trail in place.
Wow. So that's key. You say paper trail. At present, that's the best you can do? Like a person can do in that situation.
There aren't a lot of places in Canada. No. In the U.S., a lot of places have dual arrest policies, so they will arrest women. But in Canada, I don't know any place that arrests women.
Wow. That leads me to my second question. Sure.
Yeah. Isn't there only one shelter for men in Canada that just started this year? And the one in Calgary tragically got shot down. And Earl Silverman tried to do it individually. That didn't work.
Well, we want to have our dream is to have an Earl Silverman Center in Edmonton and Calgary, and so Khalil are working on this. We are I hate to use the term, but we're activists. Like, we're trying to actually like get in there and start doing something about these issues. And so we're taking any help that we can get. Like, we're trying. This one reason why we're doing this is like having this conversation with you is to start raising awareness and get people to take this seriously. But the virtual center is just, all it is right now is an email, and we do have the cafe advisors if we have to escalate something, if we can't handle it. We have a list of resources right now. There are 2 beds for men in Strathmore right now that are, you know, and it's only if women don't need them, but there is 2 beds right now. Like as Karen has said on her videos, there's 3 things that men can do if they're being battered. They can either stay and take it, they can risk a child abduction charge, or they can leave their kids with the abuser. So yeah, but we're trying to fix that, and we're gonna, like, we don't have a lot of resources or help, but this is a starting point. So we'll do what we can.
Oh, good for you. Good for doing that.
And I do have a follow-up question. So men who are being abused, since it's a psychological issue is going to be involved, what would be the best treatment? Like, because obviously a lot of them have the Duluth model training, a lot of the therapists or social.
No, you don't. They have to avoid. Well, first of all, Duluth model is designated for perpetrators, right? Who's assumed to be male. It's assumed to be male, and in fact, the maleness is considered to be all you need to know about why they're a perpetrator. It's that stupid. Started by somebody who had a master's degree from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, by the way, who had no experience as a therapist, had never worked court-mandated treatment groups, which I did for 12 years, by the way. So, first of all, no, you would never send a male victim to a Duluth. They would wind up convincing him that he somehow got what he deserved.
Yep.
You want to send him to a private therapist where he can simply talk about whatever issues are coming down for him. Maybe he's depressed about what went on. Maybe he's got anxiety about it. Who knows what all it's triggering for him. But
and I'm just going to plug our virtual center here. We do have a private therapist now who does not believe in the Duluth model, and she's very compassionate. She's very pro-male, and we just need we are going to, like, she's accepting referrals from us, like, if we feel like the man needs it. We do need donations and funding, and we have at the cafe, you can donate through the cafe website. You can get a tax receipt, so please donate to our virtual center, to the Edmonton branch, and you'll be helping us give men access to this private therapist in indigent cases where the man can't afford it. We'll try to get, like, we're going to try to be really smart about our resources, and if the man can afford it, we'll ask him to pay, but we're trying to raise a fund right now for that.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and to elaborate, so if a man's being abused and he needs counseling services, are there any free services that kind of you could say that are similar? For example, like go to AAA, go to the Y, go somewhere where they might have a model that would at least help him.
I really don't know what's available. I mean, there are in places like Vancouver, there's group of sort of self-help treatment groups for males. They don't specifically focus on domestic violence, but you could certainly go into one and talk about those issues to, I suspect, a fairly sympathetic audience. I mean, I can't say that for sure without I've been in them on occasion, but that just really varies a lot. It's very ad hoc right now because there's simply no government policy that supports it.
Yeah, and I'm female, and I'm surprised at like how much hostility I'm getting when I'm breaking up these issues with people. And even from males, like if I tell them that I'm concerned about these issues, like all the in my history, I used to be a feminist, and I remember everybody agreed with me all the time, and it was so easy to get people to get on board with whatever I was saying, and I just can't believe like the difference. And I'm and I can't even imagine if I was male how this would be for me to be advocating like this.
Yeah. Right.
But I think part of getting funding and getting resources is actually convincing more people, obviously.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the best luck you have is that you have people who are sympathetic, like Senator Ann Cools was sympathetic. Hadn't been for her, we wouldn't have that talk to the Senate. We wouldn't have that. And
that was phenomenal. Yeah. That was excellent.
Yeah.
So and so that just leads me to my next question. I want to know, like, what do you think that regular people could do? Like, the average, and I was kind of talking to Khalil, like, because in your senator presentation, you mentioned that the left really accepted this whole gender paradigm because it fit into their Marxist model. And then the right really liked it. They kind of swallowed it because it's pro-family.
Yeah.
So we were like thinking about, okay, how can we motivate people? Like, what's going to push the button to get them to agree with us? And one of my suggestions was put it in terms of money. Like, we have all these taxpayers. I'm a taxpayer, and really, we're getting ripped off because these, like the ideology that, like, there's this shrill minority pushing this ideology that's completely incorrect, and we're not getting a value for our money, like for services. They're not helping people, and frankly, I don't even think the Duluth model helps women that much.
Well, the Duluth model doesn't help anybody. I mean,
exactly. So if we frame it like that how much like regular people are getting not getting the services that we actually require.
Yes, that's certainly one way to go. And I can send you, if you want, I'll send you an evaluation of Duluth model studies that was done in Washington State. And they basically said, do not. I mean, it had negative effects. I mean, it made people who went through it more likely to be violent than
I think you mentioned that.
Yeah,
so basically, like, we're not getting the value for, like, we're paying for these programs. It's publicly funded. The government's telling us, the feminists are telling us that, this is what you need. And they say they're an authority on this. And it's like, once you get educated on this subject, you can see, like, we're really, it's too much expense. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we're not getting our value across the Western world.
Yeah, and it's not consistent with the scientific data, and therefore it cannot solve the problem because it's based on false premises.
So there's a lot of suffering that's going on, and and it's not. And what's really frustrating is we have the data. Like, we have a past website, we have tutorials there, like how to educate social workers to actually intervene successfully. So the information is there. It's just people, like, these ideologues are not recognizing that they need to do this to actually help people. And it's very frustrating because that information is there now.
Right. Well, one of the other things I did in my job was for 10 years, I flew all over the United States trying to talk sense into the funders of the Violence Against Women Act, who held the strings on what kind of treatment was permissible and what was not. Of course, what was permissible was the Duluth model and everything else was not. So everyone locally who had any kind of psychological models would fly me in to try and talk sense to these guys. So, I'm only all too familiar with it. I don't know what else I can say.
Yeah, so is there anything that you could say to regular people, like all us taxpayers, like what could the everyday man do and woman do to push back against this?
I think you have to go back to the facts. The facts don't support the stereotype. It's 50-50 male, female. It's not the way you think. Men are hurt by it too. It's a misconception to say men are not hurt by it. And what you said, the funding is completely misspent these days. It's not achieving anything. It's like the war on drugs. Spent $1 trillion. It didn't affect the cost of heroin in the streets of the United States. They're going to spend $1 trillion in domestic violence. It's not doing anything.
Yeah, we're not getting our value. It's not helping people.
Right.
So I brought up the cafe. I mean, our virtual center that we're starting here in Edmonton. That's going to be like, we even have a couple of resources for the U.S. I mean, we want to have. It's going to be a really inclusive center. So we want to touch on, like I said, I kind of sent you some questions privately in an email about gay and lesbian, because I feel like, like, my concern. I mean, there's been some articles going around with allegations about gay and lesbian. But I really want to focus on what are your comments on?
Getting echoes again.
1 second. Sure.
All right. Okay.
So,
a short statement.
For a virtual center, what can we do to help the gay and lesbian community? Because the gender paradigm isn't servicing them, and we want to include them because they're just as being victimized as everybody else.
Right. And the issue here is not gender. That's not the issue is attachment. If you're in an intimate relationship, it doesn't matter whether you're attached to another man or to a woman, you still got intimate issues. And the same psychological factors affect gay relationships as affect straight relationships. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the incidence rates are higher in gay relationships. The StatsCan found 11% for lesbians compared to 4% for straight women. And, there was a study done in Arizona years ago where women who'd been in both a prior relationship with a man and a woman reported on abuse, and all forms of abuse were higher in their lesbian relationship with a woman. So it's an issue, and it's attachment issues. The same kind of psychological issues go on. But there has to be somebody who can step up and talk about this from a psychological perspective that reaches straight. Otherwise, they get no help. Exactly.
They're not being serviced, and like I said that anecdote before about the lesbian addressing the NOW conference or whatnot, like that is a woman at a NOW conference, like supposedly, trying to advocate for women's rights, and she can't get her needs met. Like, she can't get any support from her community, from a female community about this this very difficult personal situation that she's in, and she's not getting helped, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we want to be inclusive of them at our center, and so I'm just putting that out there that these are important issues too, and we want to help people.
Yeah.
That's being marginalized. So and
that's another argument for getting rid of the gender paradigm. I'll tell you is just that it does not help the gay community at all.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know if you saw that Edmonton article, but we're going to go work on it now that we've had some time to talk to you. And I'm so happy. Like, we were really excited that you responded quickly to us and that we got to discuss this. And so if you can help us with any advising, more questions that we have for you, those are the main ones. Yeah, we didn't want to regurgitate all the stuff you already said. Like, you already made your arguments and you've already convinced me.
Over and over.
Yeah.
No, but
yeah, and I'm getting tired of the repetition. That I feel like you've proven your point, and like I feel like you're Darwin talking to the Catholic Church, and it's just this is ridiculous, and it's not 21st century intelligence. Like, I feel like we should, if we have facts, now it's time to act on them. So that's why this conversation was more about implementation.
I like that, Darwin talking to the Catholic Church. I like that.
Thanks so much, Don, and we're so proud that you're Canadian.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have anything to say?
All right.
Khalil?
Yeah.
Thank you, Don.
Okay, thanks. Bye, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.